isn't about our speeches. Let me just give the background to why we're doing this. And Jeremy, thank you for hosting us. I'm really grateful. I've learned more about the galvanising industry this morning than I've ever in my whole life. And if I can apply those tools to weld together some elements of the Labour Party, I certainly will. Okay, thanks a lot. The purpose of these discussions, and this is happening every other Saturday, we're touring around the country holding town meetings, and usually we're getting about 150 to 250 people coming along to talk about their local economy. Then during the week we're doing smaller sessions in particular areas around different aspects, whether it be small businesses, whether it be the rural local authority or whatever in the local economy. And the idea this time, as I was explaining at some of the tables, when we had the last election, it was a snap general election, and we had to write that manifesto rapidly to then get it out to the general public. And it was a popular manifesto, but it was written centrally. And what we're trying to do now is write the next manifesto from the grassroots up. So discussions like this are taking place literally every other day, where Labour Party shadow front bench members and others are going out, holding meetings, conferences, etc., just to listen to people, and then to talk through then how you put the ideas that people are bringing forward into production when we go into government itself. And usually, basically, it's looking at what is the local stats for the local economy, what's the local economy like. Then also, here's a menu of policies we've developed for the last manifesto that we're now developing in more detail, but also listening to people then about what other ideas that they've got. The point that Jill made is that this area, this region, has been part of the, if you like, the engine of growth of our manufacturing base in particular for the last 2 centuries. And what we've got to do is make sure anyone who goes into government, and this isn't done by government, but the role of government is to nurture the very engines of growth that will produce the prosperity under Labour government that will be shared by everybody. And in that way, I believe that we can create that society that we want. Now, the problem, let me just outline some of the, I won't go through all the boring statistics that they've outlined from the speech they gave in my office gave me, but because all these economists that advise me, well, to be honest, I lock them in the room, they just row all the time amongst themselves. But yesterday they at least got some agreement around some of the basic stats. But the summary is this, that leave aside Brexit for a minute, and I'll come back to that. Even without Brexit, our economy was virtually stagnating. And if you look at what's happened in the last few months, Bank of England, Treasury, if you look at the other independent organisations, even New Economics Foundation this morning, have all downgraded growth. And so we're bobbing along the bottom at the moment between anything between 1.2 or 1.4% growth. Ever since the Second World War, our average level of growth has been above 2% always. So we've got this sort of corrugated economy at the moment where we're bouncing along on the bottom. And manufacturing, you'll know, manufacturing nationally has just gone into recession. So we've had 4 quarters where manufacturing has fallen back. And it's spread across quite a large number of sectors as well. It's the same in construction. It isn't all down to Brexit. It is about 9 years of austerity. And the New Economics Foundation produced a paper today. It's basically their analysis, and they're independent, and we've worked with them. They're quite a challenging organisation. Their analysis is that we've lost about £100 billion worth of GDP growth as a result of 9 years of austerity. And a lot of that is because of the lack of stable, consistent, what Mariana Mazzucato, one of our advisors, calls long-term patient investment. So in developing our last manifesto and develop it now, the key issue for us is we've got to invest to grow. We've got to invest to grow. And we're falling behind other countries and other regions in particular that are investing on a scale that we're not. Now, in the last manifesto, and we've been talking it through in more detail for the development of the new one, we said the way forward is we need a significant investment into our basic infrastructure again, linked to our investment in skills training in particular. We put together, and it was on the basis of the CBI's own figures, a proposal for £500 billion worth of investment in our infrastructure over a 10-year programme. And the idea behind that is £250 billion coming from CapEx, in other words, the government departmental spending, but then looking at the German model of setting up, and it's not just Germany, actually we're an outlier, most other countries have got these already, setting up a national investment bank, another £250 billion, that makes £500 billion of that 10-year programme absolutely devoted to investing in our infrastructure, and then a programme of revenue expenditure to establish a national education service, which will then enable us to have education free, like the NHS, free from cradle to grave, but focused on actually making sure the kids come out of those schools with the skills that we need in our economy. And that means actually investing in FE, investing properly in apprenticeships, which are, many of the schemes are failing at the moment, but also making sure that our kids that do go on to university don't come out with a £57,000 burden of debt from tuition fees. So all of that we're developing in more detail at the moment, but it is in response to what everyone is saying. We've just got to invest. A lot of people here have got your own companies. You establish the companies, and actually you need to invest in that initial stage, and you need to continuously invest to make sure you're competitive. And we're facing the challenges of the fourth industrial revolution, as well as the way that impacts upon the traditional industries as well, but we're also facing the challenge of climate change. So everywhere I'm going at the moment, entrepreneurs coming forward, buzzing with ideas, but actually also saying, yes, we do need an investment model that will develop our economy overall. And the investment model we're looking at is the German one, National Investment Bank, that has a mandate that has actually does have within that mandate a preference towards supporting SMEs and investing in the regions rather than just London, the South East. And it is an investment model which also has regional development banks. So in this area, for example, the development of a Midlands Industrial Investment Bank, but where you determine the mandate that's specifically required for this particular area. Now that might be the mandate, might be around major infrastructure investment, whether it's roads, rail or new technology, or it might be more skewed towards skills and the capital, the human capital, or it might be more towards the individual development support of SME. But you'll determine that as we go into government, and that will give us the investment that we need that will enable us to compete in the global markets. There's lots of issues that have come up this morning, which have both been sort of macro issues about how we get that investment, then micro issues about local communities and particularly the high street, local towns, etc. At the macro level, we published a report last year by a guy called Graham Turner. He's one of our city advisors, and we've been consulting on it over the last 6 months. And basically what that analysis of the finance sector demonstrates is actually the productive side of our economy is producing wealth, but that wealth, once it goes into the city in particular, is then invested in property speculation. And as a result, we have a model of our finance sector, if you like, which other countries don't have, because in other countries the productive wealth usually goes, yes, some property, but usually goes back into manufacturing, the development of prosperity based upon the investment and the creation of wealth through a productive economy. We want to change that, so we've been talking to the Bank of England, and what we want to do is establish a strategic investment board where you bring BEIS, the Treasury, Bank of England, representatives from the city, representatives from trade unions, representatives from the manufacturing sector as well, together, that looks at how we harness private sector investment much more effectively than we do at the moment. So the old message basically is, as a state, we can bring state resources together through government departments. We can establish a national investment bank with regional development arms, which you'll be able to control the mandate of to suit your particular region. But in addition to that, we want a new relationship with the city so that the city resources are actually then applied more effectively to the productive sector of our economy. In that way, we think we can grow our economy, but we grow it in a way in which, yes, the prosperity is more widely shared, but in addition to that, it meets the challenges that we face. So we're now looking at how government makes decisions. And the Treasury has what they call a Green Book. It's only called green not because it's environmentally friendly, just because it's coloured green. And the Green Book determines the criteria upon which decisions are made about where government money goes. And we're now rewriting that, and we'll be out for consultation in a few weeks' time, and that we're inserting into it new priorities. So the new priorities, and these are in no particular order, but one of them is that we're facing climate change. So climate change has to be one of the key areas in which we determine our investment. The second is about inequality. And the issue around inequality is that, and really I'm amazed at how people are not as angry as they should be. The reason about inequality is about actually in the investment in this country at the moment, from the state, from the government, is largely in London and the South East. And if you look at the proportion going to London and the South East as against the other regions of the country, you can see why the infrastructure in some areas is not kept up with what is actually required by the economy. So the change in the Green Book criteria will be about making sure there's a fair distribution of investment all the way around the country, rather than just in projects within London and the South East, which multiply, and you've seen what happened with Crossrail, now there's demands for Crossrail 2, etc. And we've been arguing about what about Crossrail for the north, but also, interestingly enough too, it isn't just about the infrastructure of road and rail, it's also the infrastructure whereby, which is mainly more daily relevant to people's lives. So everywhere I go now outside of London, people are raising the issue of buses and the bus networks that have gone and how you invest in those and how they should be managed more effectively and how they could actually contribute more effectively to the local economy. And I've done a number of these meetings with young people, and one of the issues around young people as well has been about how much the charges on the buses are even to get them to work, and it undermines the wage levels that they actually have themselves. So we've been looking at how government makes decisions in a way in which areas like this, maybe for the first time in decades, will get their fair share of investment, but it would be driven by the needs as you identify them, rather than just what's happening in Whitehall and in Parliament itself. The other issue, just to say as well, high streets have been raised continuously with me. In every area I've gone to, high streets, of course, they're changing how people purchase goods, is changing with the internet, etc. But people still actually do want to go to a shop every now and again. And we're social animals, we want to mix, so they do want to go to a town centre where they can go to the cinema, have a meal, go to a pub, mix, etc. So what we've been looking at is what measures are required to do that. And part of it is about transport, bus services, etc., and trams and elsewhere. It is, of course. But it is also about making sure the local authority is adequately funded with suitable powers to impact upon their local area. So, for example, where a shop has stood open or property has stood open for a number of years, we've been saying the local authority should have more powers in terms of how they can, whether it's compulsory purchase or how they can influence a particular owner. One of the issues that's come up is, of course, about reforming the business rates. It's also about making sure that we have a fair taxation system on the internet companies themselves. But also we have been looking at a land value taxation that could be used on non-residential properties to ensure that we bring properties back into use. But that also gives a stable funding base for local authorities too. The other issue is we also included in our last manifesto this idea of an overseas companies levy on properties owned by overseas companies, and using, as other countries have done, that levy not just to gain income into the local area, but also to use that as a levy which will encourage the property use itself, and maybe encourage overseas companies themselves not to allow properties to stand empty just because for speculative use in the future, but actually have more of a role in working with the local authority in developing their properties constructed in their areas. So all of those ideas now are coming from all these meetings that are taking place. They're going into basically our discussions now about the development of the National Manifesto that we'll publish next time. But all engaged on this dialogue that's happening. It is about investment though. It is about investment to grow, because that's the only way we can secure a prosperous economy. The other aspect of that investment to grow, as I say, is making sure that the prosperity is shared by everyone as a result of that investment. And that does mean raising the level of wages. It does mean a real living wage. It does mean restoring collective bargaining back into this country as well. 20 or so years ago, 80% of us had our wages determined by sectoral collective bargaining. Now it's down to 20%. And part of the reason that we now have, well, we have a number of 4 million people living in poverty who are in families where someone's at work, and that's as a result of the low level of wages that we've got. So the idea is as you boost the economy, you make sure the rewards are more fairly distributed, and that in itself, in the old Keynesian style, makes sure money is in people's pockets that they can spend locally. Finally, on this other point, in discussing the role of local authorities, we've been developing the idea of the collaborative council. Developed in Preston now, we've been working with Matthew Brown up in Preston on an economic model developed in the States, whereby the council basically brings together the anchor institutions in a particular area, and in Preston they've done it with They've brought together the university, the police, the health service and the council, and they've looked at their procurement powers. And basically what they've done is they've repatriated procurement. So whereas they were spending outside of the region, they've brought their spend back inside. But they've focused it on spending that money on local SMEs. And if you look at what's happening in Preston, it's regenerating that local economy. And it's regenerating it in a way which has put spending power back into the local pockets of local people as well. Now, we've set up a team nationally called the Community Wealth Building Unit. And what we'll do is we'll seek to work with local councillors and local labour groups to see if that model can develop in this particular area, because I think it could be one alongside the national procurement that we can use, alongside local procurement, can actually not only regenerate some areas but actually ensure that again you're developing the prosperity within the local economy, which effectively then becomes a stable, growing economy. They're the sort of policies that we're putting out. I don't know when the next general election is coming, but it could come shortly or later, but we're going to be prepared for it. And one of the issues, obviously, that we've got to be prepared for is Brexit, which has been a nightmare. We were talking at one table. Well, for 2 years, the government never approached us to have any dialogue whatsoever. For 2 years, I've been in Parliament 20-odd years. Normally, you have across parties, you have some form of communication, particularly on massive issues like this. We couldn't sustain any form of dialogue with the government because, first of all, we would never know who from day to day was in charge. You know, and this isn't making a knockabout point. We had 3 Brexit secretaries in a row. We never knew who in cabinet actually was dominant at any one particular time, and we never were approached by the other party. So I think it's been really mishandled. Only in those last 3 weeks, the Prime Minister approached us. We're involved in discussions and negotiations with her as best we can. We've put forward our proposals on what we think could be an effective deal to protect the economy and jobs, a permanent customs union, a relationship with the single market that will enable a frictionless trade, and also the protection of regulations on consumer, environmental and employment rights. But at the moment, even though we're in discussions with them, there isn't any movement from the government at the moment. Theresa May will come back from Brussels today, and she may have some changes to the backstop, and she'll put those to Parliament either next week. But we're saying if you haven't got the proposals before Parliament by mid-March, we'll be supporting Yvette Cooper's amendment again to say that either they put up a no deal that we can then vote down, which I think there will be a majority vote down, or then at least we become real and extend Article 50. At the moment, we're dealing in Parliament with 600 statutory instruments. Ministers are turning up at committees on those SIs, not understanding them themselves. And Parliament itself is struggling to deal with proper scrutiny of those statutory instruments. So inevitably, I think the timetable will be put back. If we can't reach a deal in Parliament itself, our view is that our party has taken the view that we go back to the people themselves and let the people decide on the next steps. But all we've tried to do is constructively work with the government over these last few weeks to try and see whether we can protect jobs in the economy. There isn't an area that I haven't gone to where I've met people from all sectors of the economy that doesn't think this is a disaster now. And what we've got to do is, I think, look after the interests of the country rather than just any party advantage. And we've been trying to form coalitions in Parliament to enable that to happen. But up until now, it's been, to be honest, infuriating. I speak as a constituency MP again, which are high dependency on European trade, and I'm really worried for the people, my constituents' jobs, just as you must be worried about the constituencies here. Either way, we'll try and get a constructive relationship going, which secures either a deal or, as I say, back to the people. Finally, I'd like this dialogue to continue on. So our local MPs, our local MEP, and our local parliamentary candidate will seek to maintain the dialogue, because in addition to drafting that national manifesto, what we want you to look at is developing a local economic prospectus. And a lot of work has gone on, I know, from the Forum and from ASSA and elsewhere, but looking for an economic prospectus for the local area, so that when we go into government, you know what you want from government, and we can deliver it, and we can hit the deck running to create that prosperous economy that we need. Thanks a lot.